All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Learn Partimento podcast. It's a great pleasure to introduce my guest today, harpsichordist, pianist, and composer Jonathan Salamon. He has written a very interesting article called The Leo, a Galant Schema, and its affective content, which we will be discussing today in addition to other topics. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome to the Learn Partimento podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Let's actually begin with your background. I would love to dive into the article, but I'm just very curious because this community of people who get into schema, early music, partimento, counterpoint, I just love hearing their stories and a little bit how they got into it because it's always very interesting how they stumbled upon a certain book or something that or met a teacher that turned them onto this. So how did you get into partimento or schema and early music?
I did my undergraduate in NYU in piano, and I immediately started taking harpsichord lessons with Dr. Mary Farwood, who is on faculty there in music cognition as well as harpsichord and Baroque music. And one of the reasons why I was so drawn to studying the harpsichord and playing Baroque music was I really loved improvisation. And in high school, I had done these composers concerts where I would sort of write a piece or like a skeletal piece and then elaborate on it in the concert because I felt like I couldn't really commit to one way of playing it. So that was sort of a my beginning interest in improvisation. And so I studied
How
with
did
Dr.
you,
Farwood
Jonathan?
for,
How did you
yeah.
do that? I mean, for that's like a mystery for a lot of people. How do you do that when you started out? Did you consciously learn how to do that?
I think I played through while I was composing these pieces, and they were sort of neoclassical, vaguely 18th century style pieces. Um, and I would play multiple versions of them and then sort of in my head keep different passages that I liked and then would execute them in the moment. And it was very liberating not to have to just play it a certain way. So it was kind of nice not having to just commit everything to the page. So I think that was sort of a natural tendency in that compositional process for me that I then found out later when I got into partimento and sort of the whole tradition, that's something that was very typical of the time.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about so the harpsichord is that and you also mentioned in your bio that you also play the piano. What made you get drawn to the harpsichord?
I really loved the sound of it and the variety of different types of instruments. It seemed like a whole different universe to me from the sort of just um, shiny black grand pianos and uprights of the world today. And I quickly learned that you could discover so much about the music of the past on the instruments for which it was written. And I also learned so many different things about composers that were somewhat new to me at that time in high school, like Scarlatti, for example. And I think Scarlatti was one of the um, composers that made me become really interested in playing keyboard music on the harpsichord.
Great. Let's dive into your article. Um, Now, it's the Leo, a Galant schema, and its affective content. First, before we start that, when did you get into schema theory, and how did that eventually lead to this, your identification of this schema?
So while I was taking harpsichord lessons, I at NYU, I told my professor, or I shared with her some of my improvisations I had recorded, and she said, "You have to get this book called Music in the Galant Style by Robert Gjerdingen." Uh, and so I immediately bought it, and it was just a completely transformative experience for me. I heard music in a totally different way once I was able to sort of learn the different schemata and identify them in many different styles. And I just started incorporating them into my own improvisations. So I got Gjerdingen's book, and I was also recommended Sanguinetti's book, Art of Partimento. And so those two really informed my early experiences with it in college. Um, as to identifying the schema, uh, I I liked to sort of pick pieces apart by schema, by schemata. And I noticed that there was this phenomenon happening very frequently, especially at closures, where there's a repeating pattern in the treble or the highest part with a descending bass line that sort of delays closure and prepares for cadence. And I was actually attending a improvisation workshop at Eastman School of Music in the summer of 2014 with the pianist and Professor John Andrew Slominski. And I played this for him. And
okay.
yeah. And Professor Rabinovich, who I believe is or was going to become a professor of music theory in Georgia. And so I sort of played some of these excerpts for him, and I said, "What's going on here?" And he said, "Well, that could be a really interesting graduate study." And so I kept it in the back of my mind, and then investigated it when I was doing my DMA thesis at Yale.
Right. Okay. So let's just dive into the article. So
yeah.
Let me bring it up on the screen here. And so let's go over this presentation that you've put together for it. And this is kind of introducing it first, and it's related in some way to the Romanesca. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So Gjerdingen outlines three types of Romanescas in music in the Galant style. So you have the stepwise variant, which alternates 5/3 and 6/3 chords. And that's more typical of the 18th century. It's more galant than the leaping variant, which we associate with Pachelbel's canon. So that one is just all 5/3 chords in succession. And then finally, we have the Galant norm, which is a sort of hybrid between the two. So you have the stepwise variant in the first three steps of the scalar descent, and then you have a leap down a fourth to scale degree 3, which then begins the cadential motion. So this forms the basis for the outlining of the Romanesca in the Galant period.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
Do you want to? Okay, just let me know when you want to go to the next slide.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, and so this just sort of shows the relationship among the Romanesca variants. So on the left, you have the leaping variant as associated with Pachelbel and the canon in D. I chose Corelli for the Galant norm because he often uses this type of Romanesca to begin pieces. And so in this example, this is from his violin sonata opus 5 number 10. I'll play the treble and the bass line. So you get this stepwise descent, and then with the leap down, that becomes the Galant norm. And so then the Leo, I identify it as a sort of continuation of the stepwise variant that is also very connected to the Galant style. So it's a sort of offshoot. Because structurally and functionally, I think the Leo exists in similar spaces as the Romanesca. So both as an opening and sometimes closing gesture.
That's in the same way that in the music in the Galant style, Professor Gjerdingen talks about the Meyer, and then he has a few versions of the Meyer. He has the Aprilli, he's got is it the Pastoral, so Pastorella, the Jupiter. So that way, is that what you're going for? A kind of variation on a kind of a core schema.
Exactly. I write about that in the article as well, identifying that there's this big Meyer archetype, and then you have these different subsets or variants that Gjerdingen outlines, and they're very distinct. So even though it may be an offshoot of the Romanesca, I think it has a very distinct profile. So you can go to the next slide. So I so one of the reasons I named it after the Leo is because I found it in one of his solfeggi, and this is sort of the most obvious example of it, and so I thought I'd play this. But so as we know, Gjerdingen identifies schemata and others as well, and names them after composers or has these fanciful Italianate titles, and so I thought this would be sort of a good. A nice allusion to a Galant master because it's found in a pedagogical material.
Right. And you find it, and we'll get into that, but you find it in so many different places. So it's really wonderful. I'd love to hear the future examples. So this now that's actually curious that it's in the solfeggio manuscripts. I think. How many have you identified in these? Have you seen in Leo particularly?
I've only seen this and the next example. So it's not found in super abundance, but you can tell that it's a distinctive gesture that one needed to learn or adapt, and I think I haven't really found it in too many other solfeggi manuscripts, at least the ones that I've sourced through Gjerdingen's website. So I encourage anybody to stay on the lookout because it's really fun to identify these things.
Great. Do you want to play it for us?
Yes.
So we're looking for that ostinato pattern in the top voice, right?
Yes. So you have this repeating treble line, and the bass descends by step. In this case, down a hexachord, so from scale degree 1 down to 3.
Okay. Right. And that's from measure 7482 in the solfeggio in the Santini collection. And people, if they go to your article, you reproduce the whole thing and they can see it in the larger context. We're going to talk about that, right?
Yeah.
The devices in which it's used. And there's a few separate functions that we use it for. And here's another one that you mentioned, the second one.
Yeah, so these are kind of a pair of solfeggi. They're both in G major. This one is a little bit of a shorter descent, but the character is there as well. And then, so it occurs, there's like a sort of preview of it from measures 10 to 12. And then it all happens quite rapidly in measure 13, sort of releasing the energy before this cadence. And what's distinctive about it is that you have these nice dissonant clashes between these sort of root position chords or chordal outlines on the 7. And it makes for a really, I think, potent schema. It gathers your attention because everything sort of falls away and you're very focused on what's going on in this texture.
Okay, let's move on now. So this gets into So first of all, let's talk about the delaying closure. So the pre-cadential Leo. So this is using the Leo schema just before a cadence.
Yeah. So this is a chart that sort of outlines the typical form of the schema as it's building energy towards a close. And so in the first line, you have the beats. So this is a typical descent of a tetrachord. So maybe one chord per let's say, quarter note. So you have in the treble, you're sort of oscillating around usually scale degrees 1, 3, and 5 in the tonic or in the dominant, depending on where in the piece you are. And in the bass, you have this descent by step. So if I were to improvise one, and we'll get into many examples coming up, you could just, let's say we're in D major, just kind of swirl around the first 3 scale degrees and go down in the bass. So that's just sort of the general outline for delay as a delays closure.
What harmonies do you put in the bass?
So if I were to realize it,
yeah,
or
what would be the figures?
So it would be 5-3, 4-2, and then perhaps 5 or 7 even, and then you have 6-4. And often when you go down even further to scale degree 4, you may get a nice 7th chord, which is really lovely, or even a 9-7. And then once you hit scale degree 3, you're sort of exiting and getting ready to close.
Those are beautiful. I mean, is that... I'm jumping ahead, but I want to ask you if those harmonies, I mean, are they Galant harmonies, or do you find them perhaps in earlier, you could say Baroque periods? Do you find those sorts of chords, are they particular to the Galant, or do they come earlier?
I think a lot of these schemata have antecedents in, or have ancestors in earlier music, like in ground bass patterns, which is of course where the Romanesca comes from. I think you do find examples. One thing that I found funny, I was watching the BBC version of Pride and Prejudice from I think a few decades ago, not the latest movie with Keira Knightley, but they were sort of dancing a little country jig, and at the end they had this very Leo-like gesture that it was in a sort of triple meter, and it's just kind of churning out over and over again while the bass descends, and then it goes to a cadence. So I think it's sort of a natural improvisatory gesture, or something that just is very convenient, which is I think undergirds a lot of what's done at the keyboard, right? Sort of,
yeah.
How do you add thirds and sixths to different bass motions?
Right. Okay, so let's keep going. This is absolutely fascinating. And now we talk about the Leo as an opening gesture.
Yeah, so I chose two very famous examples that show this repeating pattern in the treble with the descending bass, and you have a very brief cadence. So the first is from the 6 Brandenburg concertos. So here are the two, the viola line and the bass line. I'm going to put the viola line up an octave so it's not converging. And we know how the rest of that goes. Mm. And then for the arrival of the Queen of Sheba by Handel, this is another very famous example. So I'm just going to play the topmost line, so the violin lines and the bass. And this is sort of the parameter, I think, for defining the Leo, is you're sort of looking for the highest voice in what it's doing, and then the lowest voice. And it's it is very Romanesca-like, but it is distinct in that you do have these sort of passing tones, in between. That give it that sort of spicy harmony with the ostinato.
Have you found a lot of variation in different exemplars in the literature? And what are the common variations that you see? in this schema with the ostinato pattern? And what are the things that are varying the most?
That are varying the most in the ostinato. Usually the total descent. So it's typical to have a tetrachord. There's an example in Bach that comes later where he goes, I guess, pentachord down to scale degree 4. And then a hexachord is also very typical. And that's sort of driven by, I think, the rhythm or the meter and how long the phrase is. In terms of the treble line, it also depends on the affect of the piece, which is what we'll talk about as well. But there's usually this kind of very active 16th note motion. Again, sort of outlining scale degrees 1, 3, or 5 with passing tones around them. But yeah, I think there's another aspect of it as well that is like how much repetition is there going to be. So often this gesture is repeated twice in some examples, especially later examples, like we'll see with the Scarlatti and the Chevalier de Saint Georges. It's something it's like a boxed repetition that can be repeated again. So it fills in a lot of space. And so you do get a lot of variety in it. But they all have very...
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, maybe I'll ask that at the end, but I was just going to say, do you see it used, how much do you see it used in which function? I mean, the most. But I think you answered that in your article, right?
Yeah, it's most a closing gesture.
Okay.
I'd say in the majority of cases that I've found. It also really happens in the major mode most often.
Oh, right.
I think that's because of the way, this is my best guess, but when you're descending a tetrachord in the minor mode, you'll often get a Phrygian half cadence, right? Or there's a certain quality to it that doesn't lend itself as well to it's harmonically as in the major mode. Right. So I think it's a brighter, or it's a brighter gesture.
Wonderful. Okay, so now what was interesting is that you had in your article a composer profile. And actually one thing, maybe everyone in the community knows this already, but for people who are not familiar, I mean, Johann Sebastian Bach, typically regarded the Baroque composer of old-fashioned, contrapuntally dense music, especially when you compare him to someone like Mozart from the so-called classical era. But in your article, in the composer profile, you make the case that in fact Bach demonstrated a formidable Galant credential in his music, and using, for instance, the piece like the partitas. So can we talk about your composer profile on Bach in your article?
Yeah. So you mentioned it perfectly. I think Bach is very much associated with this turgid style, as was described, very contrapuntally dense, sort of trapped in his own old-fashioned realm. And Robert Marshall, Lawrence Dreyfus have argued that he's actually much more a sort of progressive composer, somebody very much in tune with the times. And Andrew Tolley has written a lot about the Bach's partitas and sort of how when he went to great expense to produce the partitas, the keyboard partitas, he made them appealing to a Galant or sort of more popular audience. One of the things he did was add these more extravagant titles to the beginning of each partita. So the first one, the B flat, you do have a prelude, and then the second one you have a sinfonia, the third one you have a fantasia, the fourth you have an overture, the fifth you have a preambulum, and then the sixth you have a toccata. So just an example of something that he was consciously doing to sort of make his music appeal to the market and to wider tastes, which is something that we wouldn't naturally think about Bach, because he's just so closely associated with sort of being a composer in the church, sort of very concerned with counterpoint and these types of learned aspects that are distinct or tend to be distinct from Galant music. So what I wanted to focus on with the Leo is to show, especially in his earlier works, when he's very much studying Italian music, particularly Vivaldi, that he was aware of these schemata, and in particular in the Leo was employing it. And I think it's one of the really fascinating things about schemata is that you can sort of find these new avenues for assessing composers' music,
Right.
like Bach's.
Yeah, that blew my mind that he was kind of a Galant composer. I mean, he had the chops to be to compose in that style, and you can see some of the schema. I mean, you see a lot of the schema in his compositions, and I'm quite new to this, so for me, as I rediscover his music through a different lens, it's really amazing to see. Do you want to talk about some of these examples in the presentation?
Yes. So this is from this is actually the one I played for Professor Slomensky as a really standout example of the Leo. So the English suites are his earliest extant keyboard suites, and the preludes are sort of modeled after this grand Italian ritornello style. So there's already that sort of Italian backdrop to them. And so I'll play this example. I think this one's very clear. You have the this ostinato pattern that's very expressive. It's almost let's see. You have an F major in second inversion, and then you have this E in the middle. It almost feels like a mix between C and F, or there's a kind of major seventh chord. And then he descends by step from F to A, so we have a hexachord. And then he has a nice large cadence. And so in each step you get
It's so
very
clear
distinct.
now. I mean, it's so clear. Yeah. Wow.
Right.
Yeah, it's true, and it's so identifiable. I mean, yeah, you could say Romanesca, but that gives it that finer edge, that finer detail. That's so clear. That's great. Sorry, you were going to say something.
Oh, just that. What was I going to say? Yeah, this texture, I think. So this is a 9/8, and there's a lot of motion, and this is a very large prelude, and I think it's one of his more, or maybe the most difficult movement from his English suites, at least in the preludes. And so there's just a lot of activity, a lot of imitation, and so these moments tend to be very striking, especially I found in his early works, where everything just sort of falls away, and you just get this moment of pure harmony, pure repetition, with this expressive descent, and it's very poppy in a way. I mean,
Yeah.
if you and that's almost like has much really changed. I mean, it's really nice to just hear a chord and then hear these expressive clashes
Right.
over time, right? And I think that's something we hear in music today very frequently as well.
When I interviewed Nicola Canzano, and I asked him about popular music and Baroque music, and he said, yeah, and pop music and Baroque music, I mean, the parallels are so close. I mean, in a lot of ways. And that's striking. Just when I hear something like that, I mean, I haven't really heard the English suite so much, and you just played that. I'm like, that the E and the F together. That's like you, because I know it's a trope, right? That people say, oh no, you don't have seventh chords and ninth chords in the Baroque. or but that's not true. You have all these
Yeah,
rich harmonies back then, and that's a myth that has to go away. Okay, so
I agree.
that's a fantastic example. Let's now keep moving to another example here, the toccata in C minor.
Yes. So this is another early one of his, and this is a very grand piece with a long fugue, and so there's a lot of moments where he pulls back from the texture, from the very dense contrapuntal texture, and this one in particular really stood out to me. First of all, you have the Leo, and also you have his only use of triplets in the entire piece in measure 140, which is,
Right.
I don't know. I just wondered why. Why are there triplets here? And so the interesting thing about this example is that it has the same contour as the Leo from Leo's manuscript. So you have scale degrees 3, 2, 1 over and over again, right?
Yeah.
So let's listen to this one. So we get this one sounds really poppy to me, but
Yeah.
I can use that term.
Yeah.
So we have it's just so highly ornamented.
Yeah. You have to be
And
careful, otherwise the the early music police will come knocking on the door, right?
yeah, right.
But no, it's true, and I actually didn't want to dare say it when you were playing the Leo example, but it just sounded quite poppy might be the word for that. Yeah, wow, that's wonderful. And here we go to Vivaldi violin concerto in D.
Yeah, so I want to bring this one up briefly because Bach transcribed a whole lot of music as part of, I think, study and expanding his composer's toolkit while he was in Weimar. So that's where we get that famous Marcello oboe concerto that he transcribed for the keyboard, the one in D minor. And this is a Vivaldi concerto. And I just want to show how he took Vivaldi's sparse texture in this moment and added harmonies that really outline a conscious understanding of the Galant Romanesca. And so this is kind of it shows the contour of the Leo as well as associated, like a full harmony if we're going to realize the stepwise descent with chords, with alternating 5/3 and 6/3 chords. So I'll just play the Vivaldi example as is. Right, very clear.
Right.
And so Bach has to adjust the texture, improve the texture for the keyboard. So we get in the left hand, just the most almost textbook example of realizing a stepwise Romanesca. Yeah. So this example I think is nice to see Bach being conscious of some of these things, or perhaps being conscious of the harmonic implications of a schema.
Right. That's great. Okay, so now we talk about the largest, basically the largest use of it, the closing gesture. So saving the best for last. So let's let's talk about the. So this, I see here you've used an example from Corelli.
Yeah, I think Corelli. Gjerdingen mentions this, that even though Corelli did not sort of invent the Galant style, he was a very important disseminator of it because of his popularity, his international reputation. And so this is a very expressive moment. It's very different from the active ones we've seen before. Maybe I'll even play it with the buff stop. So this is from the Christmas concerto, the so-called Christmas concerto published in 1714. So it's probably the opus 6 or earlier. But yeah, I'll play this one, and you can hear, and this includes the figures as well. So you can see 6/4/2 over the 7th scale degree, 7/5 through 8/6/4.
Great. And can I just say, I mean, when I listened to recordings, I was wondering if that sound was like a different instrument. Now, this goes to show how little I know about early music. So what was that? A buck stop? What was that called?
Yeah, it's a buff stop. Also, some people call it a lute stop. So it comes from the French word for leather, and
okay.
it puts like a piece. In this case, I think it's on my instrument, a felt-like piece up against the string, so it has a more muted sound.
That is so cool. I didn't know a harpsichord could do that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
And by the way, when do you use that sound? I mean, when is that appropriate to use that sound?
If you want a softer texture, it's often really good for rolled textures. So it doesn't have with the harpsichord, sometimes you can get a little too much sound. So, if I'm rolling a lot of chords, you can get a nicer, something more like this.
That is nice.
Yeah.
That was good. And Jonathan, you're playing magnifique.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so here we have Scarlatti now, K435.
Yeah, so this is a really fun one. This shows the Leo being repeated twice. So Scarlatti does it in a higher register and then a lower register. And
like
here's a very yes, yeah, exactly. So we know Scarlatti loves to repeat, and he's a sort of almost minimalist in that way. And this one's fun because in this very characteristic Scarlatti way, you have this leaping bass line. Let me get out of the buff stop. So we have so we have this, it's the scalar descent is hidden with the leaps, but it's really, right? And then he has this castanet type figure, and it's repeated. So we have, and then his characteristic endless repetition for the final close. So
Jonathan, this might be obvious, but if some partimento student was confronted with a Romanesca type bass, would this not be surely a perfectly good way with 16 notes to do a realization?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you could. You mean if you like to sort of instead of having the ostinato to create the other chords as well, or to outline the other chords?
I mean, it could be 2 voice, it could be 3 voice, but I'm noticing these are 2 voice textures typically. So you could have that 16th note in the right hand while you see a Romanesca type bass line.
Oh, right, like Bach does with the Vivaldi transcription. Yeah, exactly. So you could do something like. Right. So that clarifies the harmony. And then it sounds very much like a Romanesca.
Yep. Yep.
or it has
Great.
that clear galant stepwise descent. Yeah.
This is like a really form wise. This is a very. It seems like a great way to lengthen your piece if you're a composer.
Yes.
And if you're just like, what do I do now? Wait, I'll just do it in a different register, or I'll just take it an octave down, or something. And it's just a logical thing to do, and it sounds great. It sounds really good.
Exactly. And when you're improvising yourself, it gives you time to think about what you want to do next. So you can sort of break into this
Right.
pattern,
Yeah.
and you can do it. You can, yeah, it gives you plenty of time to plan ahead. So,
Right. Great.
yeah.
That's wonderful. And there's another example here by Chevalier de Saint Georges. The As a closing gesture, I see a nice figuration here.
Yes. So this is a much later than Scarlatti. So Saint George is a sort of is a classical composer, a little bit younger, or sorry, a little bit older than Mozart, working in Paris. So these are very Italianate sonatas, later in the 18th century, and he does basically the same thing. You get this repeating pattern in the treble, and this is a nice example of a almost like a further hybrid, because you get this kind of scalar outline of the leaping, the
Right.
leaping variant. So instead now we have, and it is again repeated twice. So this is a sort of very typical Italian sonata close.
Right. And I see he did that repetition again as well, just like Scarlatti did.
Yeah, it's very much the same gesture.
Well, now we go into another topic that was quite, quite a nice and I guess, a very insightful look at the larger picture. I think you took the theme of the opera, which was very much, I think, as you wrote in your article, Professor Gjerdingen said opera was really kind of like the dominant thing in the Galant era for music, and also the topics of with regard to the subject of rhetoric and its affective quality. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So I there are many different rhetorical devices that describe a kind of repetition. So when we think about music and rhetoric, the there are often there are clear allusions to delivering oratory and convincing or moving an audience of something. So one example or one type is epizoixis, which is
What is that?
something. Yeah, so that it's basically you're repeating something over and over again to get a point across or generate emotional intensity. Or even what's fascinating about this to me is that it's sort of like a two-sided coin. You can either continuously emphasize to generate energy or become more fiery, and you can also reiterate something to soothe somebody. So it has those two affective qualities. One is much more, one sort of projects strength and power, perhaps, and the other is more for quieter emotional moments or to soothe or calm. And so you find examples of this duality of epizoixis. And so I thought that was a nice sort of relationship to different aspects of the Leo. So like the Corelli example is more of a soothing one than I think, well, the next example that comes up with opera, which is meant to project power. So this is from Haas's Cleophide. And
Okay.
Let me get the text here. So, se trova perdono. So if we grant pardon to a barbaric crime, we hold the law of the throne in contempt. So this was a an aria meant to convey and glorify the rule of law. And as was typical of opera seria in those days, the court leader, in this case Augustus the Strong, was supposed to have seen part of himself in the noble commanding character in question. So in this case, Alexander the Great. And so Alessandro, the character who's singing this aria, is sort of, or one might perceive that he's reiterating Augustus the Strong's authority. And so this is achieved texturally with the way this layout is used. It's these kind of hammer chords. And I think Daniel Hartz writes about this specifically. So I can't arpeggiate the full, well, actually, maybe I can. Let's see. Well, I'll play. So it's basically an arpeggiated G major chord in the strings with a descending bass line. And it happens multiple times, and there's even a nice dialogue between Alessandro, with the hammer chords come in. So there's a kind of passing off between Alessandro and the.
Is that to project power or some kind, or like strength?
Exactly. So that's kind of like imagining a sword striking or something like that. So I think that's a sort of an intersection between the text and the use, like maybe a conscious use of the schema in this moment of closure. So it's in the sort of opening part of the aria, and also, as I mentioned, there's this kind of dialogue between the two of them that you can see I think in the next slide.
Whoa.
Yeah. So you have the strings in dialogue with Alessandro, which is, so he's literally saying the law of the throne, and it's being sort of bookended by these striking chords.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's the most in my article, the main example of the way epizoiasis and the use of repetition can convey power, generate strength, and convince somebody, because this is an actual, in the court trying to convince listeners, audience members of strength and kind of almost militaristic power, the law of the throne being something that must be observed.
And now we see back to Bach. And so his friends try to dissuade him from leaving.
Yeah, so this is kind of a full circle move back to one of his early keyboard works, his only explicitly programmatic one. And so this is a multi-movement piece, the Capriccio on the absence of a beloved brother. And so this piece, we don't know exactly for whom it was written, but it may be for sort of a friend or a friend in a fraternal sense rather than an actual brother. But so each movement conveys a different narrative. And so this one, as you mentioned, is tries to dissuade, the friends try to dissuade him from leaving. And so there's already an act of persuasion involved. And so this is a kind of, people often associate the constant use of this figure or this kind of eighth note followed by 2/16 notes as something of a kind of pacifying gesture. And so here's the layout towards the end of this movement. And this one really stood out to me because, as you'll hear in measure 15, he ends the descent on this really expressive sort of, I guess you could call it an E flat major seventh chord if you wanted to, but you get this a clash of a 4/2. and then he goes into the cadence. So this is almost, there's a very strong imploring quality here that I think fits very well into the narrative. Like this is the sort of final moment when their friends are saying, like, please don't leave us, don't go.
Yeah.
That I think is nicely conveyed with this sort of
Yeah.
soothing, and the use of six is very sweet and expressive. So
Yeah, it makes sense. I can see it. Oh, what's this?
Oh yeah,
Problematic.
well, we don't have to go over this one. This is just the idea of you know, what happens if the top texture changes. You know, how do we define it? If let's see, what is
this from his
Yeah.
Chacon?
Yeah, yeah. So this is what happens if the inner voices don't really change the harmony. So I'll play the example from the Chacon. And so I modified it in the next slide so that the inner voices remain. You get a stable D major chord. Because when I was talking to some people about this, they were wondering if, so if, even though the outer line is the same, so the top voice is in F sharp throughout most of the descent, but then it switches to an E before in measure 203. Like, is this still classic? Could you still classify this as a Leo? And so I modified it in the next example to just standardize it and make it an F sharp throughout the whole thing, and also just a D chord. So we're getting that typical just oscillating around, or having in this case like a steady repeating beat in the tonic harmony. So, and also in this case, I add that sort of expressive seventh there, as opposed to having the, right, that's a kind of a 6/5 chord instead. So
I'm a fan of 4/2 chords. 4/2 chords.
Me too. They really
4/2
are.
chords all day long. That's like the prelude in C. Okay.
Exactly.
So what is your interpretation then of this? Would you consider it a Leo?
I think I would. I think what really matters is sort of the
Just like, for instance, some people, when they the printer or the ponte, there's just so many kinds of them, and at some point it's like, it's almost the printer. It's like we don't even have any of the bass. It's just la so fa mi. Is this, are you finding in this case it's okay to call this a Leo?
Yeah, so let's take a look at the bass. So it goes down, on its own, it goes down 4 steps from 201 to 202. So that alone is enough. I think the issue was, is it okay if the inner harmony changes? If it no longer has that quality of a sort of like tonic chord? And I think the answer is yeah, I think it's fine, because it's sort of the outline in the character and the presence of the descent with a sort of repeating gesture above. I think I used to be more strict about it, but my advisor has sort of sent me examples that have challenged that. His name is Professor Robert Holzer, and he's at Yale, and he was actually in a PhD program at Penn with Gjerdingen. So they're sort of schemata buddies in a way.
That's a question. Go ahead. Sorry. Please finish that thought.
Oh, just, yeah, it's fun talking to him about sort of finding different examples and talking about, how to classify them and whatnot. So he actually argued that, because I hadn't thought of this, but that the air from the D major orchestral suite by Bach,
Yeah.
would classify as a Leo. You have that D in the upper register with the kind of descending bass. Yeah.
Right.
So that's an interesting one to debate. Like what counts as an ostinato? Yeah.
Oh yeah. So because that D is just held, right?
Yeah.
The question I had was regarding just the community of scholars who study schema, and have you shared this information? And are you friends, or do you talk regularly to people like Professor John A. Rice, Professor Vasily Burus, of course Professor Gjerdingen himself? What's your relationship with those scholars?
Excuse me. So I presented this at a conference in Baeza in Spain, and that's where I met John A. Rice, and Gjerdingen was there as well, which was a nice surprise. When the paper was accepted, I didn't know who was going to be presenting or speaking, so I got to meet him, and it was really fantastic to talk to him, and he was very encouraging. So those two, because John Rice has written several papers coming up with or describing other schemata, which I have really appreciated reading. So I do have friends that sort of like take a screenshot and look at what Haydn's doing here. Can you believe this? Of something. Yeah. And so it's really great because there's so many different ways to parse these things. And yeah, it's just it's really changed my whole perception of music, especially from this period.
Right.
So.
And did they have any pointers for your research that they say, oh, maybe you got to change this, or it's perfect, or I've never thought of this? What feedback did they give you?
I don't think I received any specific feedback on that presentation. I did present at the joint conference of the American Bach Society and the Mozart Society of America, and John A. Rice was there as well. And for that presentation, I was talking about sort of Mozart's use of I think reimagining of its type of Leo gesture in the G major Gigue. It's this kind of standalone Gigue. And I think the feedback I received was, to really be clear and explicit about what phenomena are happening and where, especially when giving a presentation. And yeah, I mean, I've received a lot of encouragement from my advisor, and he's helped me contextualize things, especially with regards to Leonard Meyer's work, which is sort of the background, and of course, the eponymous Meyer schema, the background with which a lot of some of these music cognition principles and ideas about style come from. So
great.
Yeah, there's more to learn and discover about this, I think.
We have as well here in this example Beethoven using the Leleo.
Yeah, so I thought this was so I guess I can play this on the harpsichord. You can actually play the pathétique, but my harpsichord range is, I think, perfect for middle period Beethoven. But so this is a famous pathétique sonata, and this happens at the end of the first half, and again in the second half. So I think this is a sort of pianistic reinterpretation of the gesture. So after we have our lovely he's coming up to this sort of half cadence before going back to C minor. And so we get so yeah, you have this figure repeating and he displaces the octave, and then you get this nice murky bass. So I think that perhaps could be a sort of much later use of it, because it is structurally it's in the right place. It functions very much like a Leo. So
Yeah, I hear it as well. And this one is from his piano sonata in E major.
yeah, so this is not a Leo, but I want to show the continued use of the Romanesca later in the century and in the early 19th century. So you have this alternating 5-3-6-3 pattern. Yeah. So he's consciously using the Galant Romanesca, and it's kind of I think it's quite wistful,
Right.
but it shows I think the heritage of these continuing on past their Galant prime, perhaps.
Yeah, I really feel like we see them a lot well into the 19th century. And now we go into the 20th century with Rinaldo Hahn.
Yeah, so this is an example of it as a really archaicized gesture. So this is a poem from, I believe, the 17th century, Clary. So we have this sort of Leo-like figure in the first two measures, and then it wafts down towards measure 3, and then you get the cadence before the voice comes in. So Rinaldo Hahn is tapping into this Baroque wellspring and executes this in quite a typical fashion, I think. Of course, reimagined, it's never going to be exact when it's reimagined for a later period. But
Right. We bring back Leo. And I think in your next slide, you have a few examples with Telemann, Thomas Arne.
Oh, yeah.
Are these just more examples of the Leo?
Yeah, so I put these at the end of the presentation in case there's more time, or if there's an instance where somebody wants to hear about a specific composer or a certain instance of one. So these are sort of more of the same. The Thomas Arne one is nice. It's very similar to the Chevalier de Saint Georges one. The way I found this was really bizarre. I was in the library and I saw a book that was just Thomas Arne's sonatas for harpsichord. So I pulled it out and I opened it to a page, and then that's what came up. So it was
Right.
one of those classic stories of just making a nice discovery in the library, I suppose.
Yeah. I think Gjerdingen has that very same story, but with different music. He just sees all the schemas once he I think he said that in his last interview. And so there's Telemann, a very voluminous composer.
Yes. So these are hyper galant pieces, these keyboard fantasies. There are 36 of them, and they're all pretty much two voice. The first set is, I believe, or one of the sets is more Italian, one's more French. And he sort of, I think these are really primed for more study, because he sort of introduces and uses a lot of this schemata in this. So this is a nice example. Just he has the pattern becoming more and more insistent over time, much like I think the use of the Leo, or Leo's example from his manuscript. I can play this one. It's a nice, clear example. Yeah, so we get.
I see what you mean by hyper galant.
Yeah.
Isn't he like a similar age to Bach?
Yeah, he was born in 1681.
He's older than Bach.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and he really knew how to sort of mix and match styles. There's and in a galant way. There's a lot of like fake imitative counterpoint in some of these pieces that I think is typical of galant music's reference to counterpoint or use of counterpoint. Whole different variety of national styles. I mean, so Telemann, wrote polonaises and incorporated Polish elements in his music. Really fascinating composer,
Right.
and much admired by Bach. I mean, Carl Philipp Emanuel is Telemann's godson. So
Yeah, that's right. Wow. And speaking of him, you have an example here from one of his sonatinas.
yes, this is a very early piece. Let me see. Oh, do I not have that in mind? Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so this one's, I should have included the earlier part, but he opens with a Romanesca, and it's sort of like a case study in how to employ different types of Romanesca. And so in this moment, he it sort of has this very clear C major chord in the treble with the leaping descending bass, and then
The B
a
natural
nice
passing
cadence. Yeah, exactly. So you get your beloved 4/2, right?
note.
And then he goes to a deceptive cadence, which is very charming. Uh, but yeah, that one is really stuck out to me.
I have a question about that ostinato. Does that ostinato cover the first two chords, the first chord? How wide is that ostinato?
Yeah, so often if it's one single gesture, yeah. So in this case, it does cover the first two beats. So I think it's all one sort of gesture here. And yeah, so in this case, at the end, at the upbeat to the third beat, the C is sort of continuation of the first beat. But it's nice because it's a sort of it's a more distinct texture than maybe this, which is very constant. So you have that anticipatory upbeat, gives it a nice feeling.
Awesome. Well, Jonathan, this has been incredible. And I wanted to actually end off with a couple of music ed questions for you. This is more general, and I just wanted to get your take on it because I love asking scholars and great musicians about just generally how to learn music. I think you can really give a nice perspective on this, especially since you're giving some great new research on schema theory. The first question would be, what's a great approach to practically bring schema into the classroom for your students, either private lessons or for a classroom? What do you feel is a great way to introduce schema theory to students?
It's a really good question. I don't think I've found the best answer yet, but I think what's really helpful is to I think it depends on also the level of the student, but I found it really helps to take music that's widely known and understood in other contexts and then show the schemata in the wild.
Right.
So I gave a presentation that was sort of directed in this way at NYU a couple years ago for the undergraduate pianists, and I took Mozart's Sonata in C major K545. I took the Bach's French Suite in G major, just very familiar pieces that most people by that point would have played or known, and showed how schemata are used, and then also the stylistic progression. And once people got it in their heads, and they weren't super comfortable with improvisation, but they sat down and I gave them sort of skeletons projected up from the classroom, and they were able to do things with it that they were surprised about. So another thing I think is really important is to get people very comfortable with improvisation.
How do you do that?
And yeah, you have to really encourage people to take risks. and to give them examples, concrete examples to play, listen to, and emulate. And I think that's how the schemata can work really well. I think for you know, using partimenti alone can be tricky for students who may not feel comfortable like hearing
think,
harmony.
because I don't know as much repertoire as I should, and it's nice to do partimenti exercises, and I can kind of do it in because my teachers give me vocabulary, but it's sometimes if I don't have any vocabulary beyond what my teachers just give me, sometimes I feel like I don't know what else to do because I don't know what else has happened before in the literature, and so and that's why maybe I think getting, like you said, finding it in the wild can be useful and stealing them in some ways.
Yes, because in the end they are all sort of these archetypes, and it's once you see, so when you're familiar with them, when you see the scale degree numbers and things like that, you can also see how they're adapted and used in different styles, which I think is very eye-opening. So for example, if you have, like in the Bach French suite, the opening Allemande, you have a mi fa sol or do re mi, followed by printer, right, and then move to the dominant. So that happens in a million different ways in later repertoire as well. I think the example I used was Mozart's third piano sonata, which goes do re mi, and then it has a kind of printer that's in two stages. So you have scale degree 6/5 and then 4/3. And once you make those connections, I think it helps sort of cement people's ideas, or it makes a more cohesive repository of styles for people, or it sort of links them in a way that they can start to analyze for themselves, which I think is a very important component of that as well. To see and pick apart.
What do you find are good keyboard pieces for students to learn? Simple ones, maybe just starting out.
So when I was teaching secondary harpsichord lessons at Yale to other grad students, many of whom they were musicians, but they didn't have a lot of keyboard skills. So I found that the Telemann's keyboard fantasies were very approachable, very accessible, and I used them a good amount. I think they're, when people go straight to the Bach inventions, there's many wonderful things about them, and they're they are the most perfect little pieces in the world, but there's so much there, and I like to sort of start with something lighter with Telemann. Also, because of the two voice texture, because of all the variety and all those pieces, and they're short, and they also have they're kind of da capo aria style, and that they have like an A and a contrasting B section that you repeat. I'm able to incorporate everything in these pieces. I can talk about improvisation, ornamentation, filling out textures, and also show many of the schemata. And so they're kind of like an all-encompassing set of pieces that I think are overlooked. I mean, people often assess, which is one of the tricky things with early music. They're always assessing things, comparing them to Bach's this or Bach's that. Right. And that's always tricky with Telemann, but I wouldn't venture to say that these are the most incredible keyboard pieces ever, but people enjoy playing them. I mean, all my students that I've used them with have found, because I'll say, well, here's like 8, pick one, and they find one. They're like, oh, this is great. It's really enjoyable, and there's different levels and tempi and such. So,
I found that in an interview with John Mortensen, for instance, Professor John Mortensen, he said that Yeah, Bach is a little unusual in that I mean, his pieces are just it's notes exploding all over the place, and sometimes there are like Telemann or Fischer. There are people who write
Mm,
pieces that are more approachable and actually are more typical for that period. Actually, and Bach is a little unusual. He's not so typical for that period, and with his virtuosity. And I do agree with what you're saying.
yeah,
So
definitely.
I have one more question, which is you're a composer, and I enjoyed your chicken fugue, by the way. People should check that out. Very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
And so, what is your advice to get good at composing? I have two questions: composing and counterpoint.
Mm. I think it's really good to just listen and listen as much as possible to a lot of music and hear what structures music that you find appealing have in common. So I think there's a kind of architecture to well composed music that's universal. So having some kind of introductory gesture, having and I'm sort of speaking in terms of tonal music. So yeah, like having thematic, melodic, or whatever material that you can use um, and modify and sort of turn about in different ways. Understanding, uh, what makes it a good, satisfying phrase length. I think a lot of these elements are sort of cut across all different styles and time periods and things like that. So it's sort of good elements of composition. So I think it helps to hear those things on one's own. So like if you're listening to a Brahms intermezzo, like what is it about that um, or was it about his use of structure or any element that draws you in, and to sort of identify it. And I think it really helps to articulate these types of things so that you know how to sort of build things on your own. And so I think I personally think that having a good background in counterpoint, maybe to get to your second question,
Yeah.
is also
So you said
important.
you said to be able to figure out exactly what's going on. What is that system that you use to do it? Because a lot of people have different systems. I mean, people use Roman numerals, function theory.
Mm,
People use counterpoint. People now are using partimento. People are using schema. Jazz musicians who get into classical music, they like to use chord symbols. So what system do you like to use?
um, I guess it depends on the period. I mean, I do still think in Roman numerals in some ways. I know that in some circles Roman numerals are on the out, but I mean, for music up through the 19th century, or from the common, I guess we call it the common practice period, I'm increasingly using schemata theory and things like that to analyze music. Um, I think it's good to have a blend. I mean, I had a student who had a more of a jazz background, and she wanted to learn more about keyboard harmony and basso continuo realization, things like that. So she really understood chord symbols and things like that. And so I just sort of made a bridge between that and figure bass symbols. So she would say like, oh, this is just a C over E. That's a six. Things like that. So I think it's nice to have multiple approaches, perhaps, or to have multiple layers of analysis, and that way you can sort of um, take what you want from it.
Tools in the tool bag, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Jonathan, when you listen to music that's not early music, like popular music or jazz, do you have that kind of thought process of schema in mind when you listen to music, or do you feel like maybe it's they're not connected, or do you feel like there is not so far away, actually, there is some parallel there to what you're listening to? If you're walking in the mall,
De-
that kind of thing.
Definitely. I think in scale degree numbers more and more. And I think in terms of um, well, I was trained more in movable do, which I think fits much more with this type of theoretical approach. So I'll often really be listening for, what's the bass and what's the top voice doing, things like that, to understand what's going on harmonically. Or I think I listen a lot in terms of motion, like where are things moving? Are they going higher or lower? I think for sequences as well, it can be helpful. I mean, one of the big things for me with scale degrees in schematic theory is moving away from Roman numerals. If you're analyzing the Fortspinnung passage in Vivaldi or something where you're just going a circle of fifths, and you're analyzing, you're going 1 4 7 diminished 7 3 6 2 5. I mean, it doesn't really have much meaning.
Yeah.
Analyzing those chords in that way. Whereas you may see, oh, actually, there's a kind of printer motion going on, or is this serving to modulate somewhere else? So those types of things, I think, have corrected my being sort of puzzled that why are we? What does this type of analysis say? So
great. And my last question would be, what is the future for schema theory in music education, music scholarship? Do you see it more and more being used, or is it still kind of a small kind of thing? Or do you see it actually people are curious about it and more people are exploring it?
Yeah, I think more and more people are getting very interested in it because it's so comprehensive in a way, especially going back to the pedagogical function of partimenti. I think the future, it's tricky to say because I do think it's. I get the sense that many more people are becoming interested. They're using it in their own ways, and it is growing as a field of inquiry and pedagogical use. It's tricky to see where music education is going to be going. I think there's sort of a much broader approach to music, which is very nice, that sort of adds in other de-emphasize
cultures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It de-emphasizes the
I heard about classical Turkish music a few months ago.
Yeah.
Which I heard is actually quite partimenti-like in its way of learning, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. With Professor Adam Merterbersen, yeah.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, a de-emphasizing just 19th century Germanic approach to harmony and music theory study, which I think schemata theory in a way moves away from that as well. I think there's a bright future for it, and I'm really looking forward to more performers analyzing music. Like I hope that one day, like if I'm playing chamber music with people, we can be like, oh yeah, and like that printer in measure 6. I am not at that point with a lot of colleagues, but
okay.
I think the wedding, but like really bringing in the link between theory and practice in those types of settings will be really exciting.
Just a follow up to that, have you noticed? I mean, you've been following this field of inquiry for quite a while. Have you noticed it be suddenly having an uptick of interest recently, or a slow burn over the years?
It seems like, I mean, I'm just judging from what I've seen on the internet with groups of people, or like Facebook groups and people. It seems like it's accelerated in the past few years.
Yeah.
Like it's reaching a more critical mass.
I had a great friend of mine who couldn't believe, he's a great jazz musician. He couldn't believe that somebody would analyze Chopin with figured bass. He said, "What?" So he thought, "What?" No, nobody does that. And he was a good friend of mine. But anyway, it's interesting how perspectives are changing. And well, Jonathan, what can I say? It's been really a pleasure. Thank you for playing, and I can't wait for people to hear your playing. And really a wonderful performer. and a great scholar.
Thank
I
you.
love the article. Can you mention, please, how people can reach out to you and what projects do you have lined up for the rest of the year and maybe into the next year?
Yeah, sure. So my website is a great place to reach me, jonathansalamon.com or johnsalamon.com. I have a lot of vowels in my name, so we can put that in text perhaps.
Yep.
And other projects. So I'll be making my concerto debut this November with the Chamber Orchestra of New York in Bach's first harpsichord concerto. So I'm very much looking forward to that. That was postponed because of COVID. So
Right.
knock on wood that will be happening. I'll be recording with my good friend and bassoonist colleague, some arrangements of hers of Rameau pieces for bassoon, harpsichord, flute, and violin on her album this fall. And so, yeah, and I'm looking forward to just performing more solo recitals again and things like that. So I'm still organizing my year. I just got back from Amsterdam. I was there for 7 months doing a Fulbright program. So I'm sort of settling back into things in New York. But my schedule is on my website. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. It's been a fantastic lecture. I really enjoyed it. I learned so much. And now I can't stop hearing the schema now. Now if I hear that's ostinato, I'm going to know it's a Leo. I'm going to know it.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Jonathan. Please come back again. We definitely have to do this again. And it was a pleasure. I hope you had a good time. I hope you enjoyed the questions and this unusual multimedia setup. So
yes, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.